Argentina has been through a remarkable transformation. Deficit wiped out, inflation down, and growth rebounding with strong prospects ahead. And that's in a year. I think the President really should get an applause for that. So, I don't want to take any more time, Mr. President. I would like to then invite Mr. President Millei.
Buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everyone. And how much has changed in such a short time? A year ago, I stood here before you, alone, and spoke some truths about the state of the Western world that were met with some surprise and astonishment by much of the political, economic, and media establishment of the West. And I must admit that in a way I understand it. A president from a country that, as a result of systematic economic failure for more than 100 years, as a result of having the country taken weak stances in major global conflicts, and as a result of us having closed ourselves off to trade, we had lost practically all international significance over the years. A president of such a country stood on this stage and told the entire world that they were wrong, that they were headed for failure, that the West had gone astray, and that it needed to be redirected. The president of that country, Argentina, who was not a politician, who had no legislative support, no backing from governors, business leaders, or media groups. In that speech, here, standing before you, I told you it was the beginning of a new Argentina, that Argentina had been infected with socialism for far too long, and that with us it would once again embrace the ideas of freedom, a model that we summarize as the defense of life, liberty, and private property. And I also told you that, in a way, Argentina was the ghost of Western Christmases yet to come, because we had already experienced everything you were going through, and we already knew how it would end. A year later, I must say that I no longer feel so alone. I don't feel alone because the world has embraced Argentina. Argentina has become a global example of fiscal responsibility, of commitment to honoring our obligations, and obviously a commitment to solve the inflation problem. Also, we are an example of a new way of doing politics, which is about telling people the truth to their faces and trusting that they will understand. Nor do I feel alone, because over the course of this year, I have found allies in this fight for the ideas of freedom in every corner of the world. From the amazing Elon Musk to that fierce Italian lady, my dear Giorgia Meloni. From Bukele in El Salvador to Viktor Orban in Hungary. From Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel to Donald Trump in the United States. Slowly, an international alliance has been forming among all those nations which, like ours, want to be free and believe in the ideas of liberty. And slowly, what once seemed like the absolute global hegemony of the woke left in politics, educational institutions, in the media, in supranational organizations, or even in forums like Davos, has begun to crumble. And a hope for the ideas of freedom is starting to emerge. Today I've come here to tell you that our battle is not yet won. And although hope has been rekindled, it is our moral duty and our historical responsibility to dismantle the ideological edifice of sickly wokeism. Until we have succeeded in rebuilding our historical cathedral, until we have ensured that the majority of Western countries once again embrace the ideas of liberty, until our ideas become the common currency in the halls of events such as this one, we can't let our guard down. because I must say that forums like this one have been protagonists and promoters of the sinister agenda of wokeism that is doing so much damage to the Western world. If we want to change, if we truly want to defend the rights of citizens, we must first begin by telling them the truth. And the truth is that there is something badly mistaken about the ideas that have been promoted through forums such as this one. And I would like to take a few minutes today to discuss some of them. Today, few will deny that winds of change are blowing in the West. There are those who resist change, those who grudgingly accept it, but accept it nonetheless. There are the new converts who appear when they see it as inevitable. And finally, there's those of us who have fought all of our entire lives for change to arrive. Each one of you will know which group you belong to. Surely, there may be a bit of each within this auditorium, but you will all surely recognize that the times of change are knocking on our doors. Historic moments of change have a unique characteristic. There are times when formulas that have been in place for decades become exhausted. The methods once considered the only way of doing things cease to make sense, and what to many seemed unquestionable truths is finally called into question. These are times when the rules get rewritten, and therefore these are times that reward those who have the courage to take risks. But much of the free world still prefers the comfort of what is familiar, even though it may be the wrong path, and they will insist on applying the recipes of failure. And the great burden that is the common denominator among the countries and institutions that are failing is the mental virus of woke ideology. This is the great epidemic of our time that must be cured. This is the cancer we need to get rid of. This ideology has colonized the world's most important institutions, from the political parties and governments of leading Western nations to global governance organizations, even NGOs, universities and media outlets. It has also set the tone of the global conversation over the past decades. Until we remove this abhorrent ideology from our culture, our institutions and our laws, Western civilization and even the human species will not be able to return to the path of progress demanded by our pioneering spirit. It is essential to break these ideological chains if we want to usher in a new golden age. That is why today I would like to take a few minutes to breaking those chains. But first, let's talk about what we're fighting for. The West represents the pinnacle of human achievement. On the fertile ground of its Greco-Roman heritage and Judeo-Christian values, the seeds of something unprecedented in history were sown. After definitively overcoming absolutism, liberalism inaugurated a new era in human existence, and within the new moral and philosophical framework which placed individual liberty above the whims of tyrants, the West was able to unleash man's creative capacity, initiating an unprecedented process of wealth generation. The data speaks for itself. Until the year 1800, the world's per capita GDP remained virtually constant. However, from the 19th century onwards, and thanks to the Industrial Revolution, per capita GDP multiplied by 20, lifting 90% of the global population out of poverty, even though the population itself increased eightfold. And this was only possible thanks to a convergence of fundamental values: respect for life, liberty and property, which enabled free trade, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the other pillars of Western civilization. In addition, our inventive, Faustian, exploratory, pioneering spirit, which is constantly testing the limits of what is possible. And that's a pioneering spirit that today is represented, among others, by my dear friend Elon Musk, who has been unjustly vilified by the wokeism ideology in recent days for an innocent gesture that simply reflects his enthusiasm and gratitude towards people. In summary, we invented capitalism on the basis of saving, investment, labor and reinvestment, and hard work. We got every worker to multiply tenfold, 100-fold, or why not even 1,000-fold their productivity, thus overcoming the Malthusian trap. Yet at some point in the 20th century, we lost our way, and the liberal principles that had made us free and prosperous were betrayed. A new political class, driven by collectivist ideologies and taking advantage of times of crisis, saw the perfect opportunity to accumulate power. All the wealth created by capitalism until then and into the future would be redistributed through some scheme of centralized planning, setting in motion a process whose disastrous consequences we are suffering today. By promoting a socialist agenda, while insidiously operating within the liberal paradigm, this new political class distorted the values of liberalism. And so they replaced freedom with liberation, using the coercive power of the state to redistribute the wealth created by capitalism. Their justification was the sinister, unjust, and abhorrent idea of social justice, complemented by theoretical Marxist frameworks aimed at liberating individuals from their needs. And at the core of this new value system lies the fundamental premise that equality before the law is not enough, as hidden systemic injustices exist which must be rectified. An idea that serves as a goldmine for bureaucrats who aspire to omnipotence. And this is fundamentally what wokeism is about, the result of the reversal of Western values. Each of our civilization's pillars has been replaced by a distorted version of itself through various mechanisms of cultural subversion. Negative rights to life, liberty and property were transformed into an artificial and endless list of positive rights. First it was education, then housing, and from then on absurdities like access to the internet, televised football, theater, cosmetic treatments, and an endless number of other desires that were turned into fundamental human rights. Rights that, of course, someone has to pay for, and which can only be guaranteed through the infinite expansion of the abhorrent state. In other words, we move from the concept of freedom as the fundamental protection of the individual against the intervention of the tyrant to the concept of liberation through state intervention. On this foundation, wokeism was built, an ideology of monolithic thinking upheld by various institutions, whose purpose is to penalize dissent. Feminism, diversity, inclusion, equity, immigration, abortion, environmentalism, gender ideology, among others. These are all various heads of the same beast, aimed at justifying the state's expansion through the appropriation and distortion of noble causes. Let us look at some of these. Radical feminism is a distortion of the concept of equality. Even in its most benevolent form, it is redundant, as equality before the law already exists in the West. Everything else is a quest for privileges, which is what radical feminism truly seeks, pitting half of the population against the other half, when they should both be on the same side. We have even got to the point of normalizing the fact that in many supposedly civilized countries, if you kill a woman, it is called femicide, and this carries more serious punishment than if you kill a man, simply based on the sex of the victim, legally making a woman's life be worth more than that of a man. And that they carry the banner of the gender-based wage gap, but when you look at the data, it is clear that there is no inequality for the same work, but rather that most men tend to choose better-paying professions than most women. However, they don't complain about the fact that most prison inmates are men, or that most plumbers are men, or that most victims of robbery or murder are men, let alone the majority of people who have died in wars. But if you raise these points in the media, or even at this forum, you're considered a misogynist, simply for defending an elementary principle of modern democracy and the rule of law, which is equality before the law, and of course defending the data as well. Wokeism also manifests in sinister radical environmentalism and the climate change agenda. Preserving our planet for future generations is a matter of common sense. No one wants to live in a landfill. But once again, wokeism has managed to pervert this fundamental idea. From preserving the environment for human enjoyment, we have shifted to a fanatical environmentalism, where we humans are seen as a cancer that must be eradicated, and economic development is considered little more than a crime against nature. And yet, when we argue that the Earth has already gone through 5 abrupt temperature change cycles and that during 4 of those, man was not even around. We are called flat earthers in order to discredit our ideas, even though science and the data are on our side. It is no coincidence that these same groups are the main promoters of the bloody, murderous abortion agenda, an agenda designed on the basis of the Malthusian premise that overpopulation will destroy the earth, and that we must therefore implement some form of population control. In fact, this has been carried to such an extreme that today on Earth we start to see a population growth rate starting to look like a problem, and talk about a job they've done by promoting abortion. And these forums promote the LGBT agenda, attempting to impose the idea that women are men and men are women simply based on self-perception. And they say nothing about when a man dresses as a woman and kills his opponent in a boxing ring, or when a male prison inmate claims to be a woman and ends up sexually assaulting women in prison. In fact, just a few weeks ago, there were headlines around the world regarding the case of 2 gay Americans who championed the banners of sexual diversity and were sentenced to 100 years in prison for abusing and filming their adopted children for more than 2 years. I want to be clear, when I say abuse, this is no euphemism, because in its most extreme forms, gender ideology is outright child abuse. They are pedophiles. So I want to know who would support that kind of behavior. Healthy children are being irreversibly harmed through hormone treatments and mutilation, as if a 5-year-old child could possibly consent to such things. And should their family not agree to this, there will always be state agents ready to step in favor of what they call the best interest of the child. And believe me, the scandalous experiments in the name of this criminal ideology will be condemned and likened to those committed in the darkest periods in our history. Uncovering this multitude of abhorrent practices is the eternal victimhood narrative, always ready to hurl accusations of homophobia, transphobia, and other fabricated terms, whose sole purpose is to silence those of us who dared to expose the scandal, one of which both national and international authorities are complicit. Meanwhile, in our businesses, public institutions, and educational establishments, merit has been cast aside in favor of the doctrine of diversity, which represents a regression to the aristocratic systems of the past. Quotas are invented for every minority politicians can come up with, which ends up undermining the excellence of institutions. Wokeism has also distorted the issue of immigration. The free movement of goods and people is a fundamental pillar of liberalism. We know this well. Argentina, the United States, and many other countries became great thanks to immigrants who left their homelands in search of new opportunities. However, we have shifted from attracting foreign talent to foster development to now embracing mass immigration driven not by national interest but by guilt. Since the West is supposedly the root cause of all of the world's evils in history, it must redeem itself by opening its borders to everyone, which leads to a form of reverse colonization that resembles collective suicide. So this is how we now see images of hordes of immigrants who abuse, assault, or even kill European citizens whose only sin was not adhering to a particular religion. But when someone questions these situations, they're immediately labeled racist, xenophobic, or even Nazis. Wokeism has penetrated our societies so deeply, promoted by institutions like this one, that it has even led to questioning the very concept of biological sex through the disastrous influence of gender ideology, which has resulted in even greater state intervention through absurd legislation, such as the state having to fund expensive hormone treatments and surgeries to fulfill the self-perception of certain individuals. Only now are we beginning to see the effects of an entire generation that has mutilated their bodies, encouraged by a culture of sexual relativism. And these people will have to spend their entire lives in psychiatric treatment to cope with what what they have done to themselves. Yet, no one dares to speak about these issues. Not only that, but the vast majority have also been subjected to the misguided self-perceptions of a tiny minority. And wokeism also seeks to hijack our future, because by dominating the faculties of the world's most prestigious universities, it is shaping the elites of our countries to reject and deny the culture, ideas and values that made us great, further damaging our social fabric. What future do we have if we are teaching our young people to feel ashamed of our past? All of this was incubated and increasingly developed over the past decades after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Curious enough, free nations began to self-destruct when they no longer had adversaries to defeat. Peace made us weak. We were defeated by our own complacency. All these and other aberrations, which we can't enumerate due to time constraints, are the threats that today endanger the West. And unfortunately, these are the beliefs that institutions like this one have been promoting for 40 years. And no one here can feign innocence. For decades, there has been a worship of a sinister and murderous ideology, as if it were a golden calf, moving heaven and earth to impose it on humanity. And this organization, along with the most influential supranational bodies, have been the ideologues of this barbarity. Multilateral lending organizations have been instruments of extortion, while many national governments, and especially the European Union, have acted as their armed wing. Is it not true that right now, as we speak, in the UK, citizens are being imprisoned for exposing horrifying crimes committed by Muslim migrants, crimes that the government seeks to conceal? Or didn't the bureaucrats in Brussels suspend Romania's elections simply because they didn't like the party that had won? Faced with each of these discussions, wokeism's first strategy is to discredit those of us who challenge these things, first by labeling us and then by silencing us. If you're white, you must be racist. If you're a man, you must be a misogynist or part of the patriarchy. If you're rich, you must be a cruel capitalist. If you're heterosexual, you must be heteronormative, homophobic or transphobic. For every challenge, they have a label, and then they try to suppress you by force or through legal means. Because beneath the rhetoric of diversity, democracy and tolerance that they so often preach, what truly lies is their blatant desire to eliminate dissent, criticism and ultimately freedom, so they can continue to uphold a model in which they are the main beneficiaries. Haven't we heard only recently how certain European leading authorities, and quite reddish, I should say, actually have made open appeals to censorship? Actually, there is no censorship, but rather this idea that you need to silence those who don't partake in the woke ideology. And what kind of society can wokeism create? A society that replaced the free exchange of goods and services with the arbitrary distribution of wealth at gunpoint. One that replaced free communities with false collectivization. One that replaced the creative chaos of the market with the sterile and sclerotic order of socialism. A society filled with resentment, where there are only two types of people. Those who are net taxpayers on the one hand, and those who are beneficiaries of the state on the other. And by this, I don't refer to those who receive social assistance because they don't have enough to eat. I'm talking about the privileged corporations, the bankers who were bailed out during the subprime crisis, the majority of media outlets, the indoctrination centers disguised as universities, the state bureaucracy, the unions, social organizations, and the crony businesses that thrive of the taxes paid by hard-working individuals and taxpayers. I'm talking about the world described by Ayn Rand in Atlas Shrugged, which unfortunately has become a reality. It is a system where the big winner is the political class, which becomes both a referee and stakeholder in this redistribution game. I say it again. The political class is a referee and stakeholder, an interested party in this redistribution. Of course, the one who redistributes is the one who keeps the lion's share. And despite the cosmetic differences between various political parties, they share interests, partners, deals, and an unshakable commitment to maintaining the status quo. That is why I call them all the party of the state. A system that hides behind well-meaning rhetoric claiming that the market fails and that they are the ones responsible for correcting the failures through regulations, force and bureaucracy. But there's no such thing as market failures. Market failures, I say this again, do not exist. Since the market is a mechanism of social cooperation where property rights are voluntarily exchanged, the very concept of market failures is a contradiction in terms. The only thing such intervention achieves is the creation of new distortions within the price system, which in turn hinders economic calculation, savings and investment, ultimately leading to even more poverty in its wake, or a mesh of abhorrent regulations, such as is the case in Europe, which kills economic growth. As I often say in my speeches, if you believe there is a market failure, go and check to see if the state is not involved. And if you find that it isn't, check again, because you got it wrong. For this same reason, since wokeism is nothing more than a systematic plan by the party of the state to justify state intervention and increase public spending, this means that our first and foremost mission, if we truly want to reclaim the West's progress and build a new golden era, has to be the drastic reduction in the size of the state, not only in each of our countries, but also the drastic reduction of all supranational organizations, as this is the only way to root out this perverse system, draining its resources in order to give back to taxpayers what belongs to them and to put an end to the sale of favors. There is no better method to end state bureaucracy than to have no opportunity for such favors to be sold in the first place. The functions of the state must once again be limited to defending the right to life, liberty and property. Any other function the state assumes will come at the expense of its fundamental role and will inevitably lead to the omnipresent Leviathan that we all suffer under today. Today we are witnessing the global exhaustion of this system that has dominated us for the past few decades. Just as has happened in Argentina, the rest of the world is seeing the deepening of the only truly relevant conflict of this century and of all previous ones, the conflict between free citizens and the political caste that clings to the established order, doubling down on its efforts aimed at censorship, persecution and destruction. Fortunately, throughout the free world, a silent majority is organizing, and in every corner of our hemisphere, the echo of this freedom cry resonates. We are facing a change of era, a Copernican shift, the destruction of a paradigm and the construction of another. And if globally influential institutions like this one wish to turn over a new leaf and participate in good faith in this new paradigm, it will have to take responsibility for the role played over the past decades, acknowledging to society the mea culpa that is being demanded of them. To conclude, I wish to speak directly to the world's leaders, to all those who lead both national states and also to major economic groups and influential international organizations, whether present here today or listening from their homes. The political formulas of the past decades, which I have referred to in this speech, have failed and are now collapsing under their own weight. This means that thinking like everyone else does, reading what everyone else reads and saying what everyone else says can only lead to error, even though many still insist on marching towards the precipice. The script of the last 40 years has run out, and when a system runs out, history opens up. That is why, to all global leaders, I say it is time to break free from that script. It is time to be bold. It is time to dare to think and to dare to write our own verses. Because when the ideas and narratives of the present all say the same thing and they say the wrong things, being brave means standing outside of time. It means looking backwards, not being dazzled by the transient, losing sight of the universal. It means reclaiming truths that were obvious to our ancestors and that are at the core of Western civilization success, but which the regime of monolithic thinking of recent decades has persecuted as if they were heresies. As Churchill once said, the farther back you can look, the farther forward you're likely to see. In other words, we must reconnect with the forgotten truths of our past to untangle the knots of the present and take the next step forward as a civilization towards the future. And what do I see when I look back? That we must once again embrace the last proven thesis of economic and social success. This is the model of freedom. Once again embracing the ideas of freedom, going back to libertarianism. That's what we're doing in Argentina. That is what I trust President Trump will do in the new America. And this is what we invite all the great nations of the free world to do if they wish to halt in time what is clearly a path leading to catastrophe. So ultimately, what I'm proposing is that we make the West great again. Today, just as 215 years ago, Argentina has broken its chains and invites us, as our national anthem declares, invites us, all mortals of the world, to hear the sacred cry, freedom, freedom, freedom. May the forces of heaven be with us. Thank you all very much, and long live freedom, damn it!